Chapter 18. A loud ringing noise awakens Jeremy from his dreamless nap. He opens his eyes, raises his head swiftly, and wipes the sleep from his eyes and the semi-dried drool from his cheek. It's the front doorbell, and it continues to echo throughout the house as he slowly drags himself toward the front of the house and to the location of the door from which the sound originates. "All right, I'm coming," he shouts out groggily, rising to his feet. After stammering all the way to the door, he turns the handle and sees the face of Erin staring back at him. His eyes widen as she smiles at him through the opened crack in the doorway. "Hi, Jeremy," she says as they stare at each other for a moment. "I brought you your schoolwork. Can I come in?" she asks with an eyebrow raise and a sideways half smile. Jeremy stands silent for a moment, a glazed over look on his face. Erin swings her arms gently back and forth while rocking from toe to heel and back again. After she flashes Jeremy another awkward smile, he finally snaps back to reality and answers her. Yeah. Come on in." He managed to grunt out as he opens the door and steps aside to allow her to enter the house. As she walks past him, he quickly fixes his appearance as not to look like he had just been sleeping all day. Follow me," he says as they walk toward the kitchen. "I know where the kitchen is, Jeremy," she answers back. "We've only done our homework there 1,000,000 times." She continues on with an obvious little hop in her step. They sit at the kitchen table quietly for only a few seconds before Erin reaches into her book bag and pulls out a folder containing an erratic mess of papers. Jeremy stares at the array of work for him, crinkled and oddly mixed. As Erin begins to make sense of the chaos in her hands, Jeremy locks eyes with Erin with a fearful eyebrow raised upon his face. "Sorry it's such a mess. I dropped it in the hall at school just after they told us." She tries to comfort him, but loses her train of thought while reliving the moment they announced AJ and Mr. Sampson's deaths. She clears her throat and places herself against the table before continuing. "This is all the work you missed," she says as she quickly rushes the folder over to Jeremy. Jeremy takes the mess of work in his hands, fixes it up a little bit, and searches for a place to put it out of sight. "Thanks," he replies as he tosses it over on the countertop just behind him. "I already know about AJ and Mr. Sampson, if that's what you were going to say," Jeremy continues on. "They had a report about Mr. Sampson in the news this morning." With that, they both sit cautiously quiet again for a few moments, looking down at their hands on the table. Neither of them is used to a silence between them. They are normally more comfortable with each other than with anybody else. However, between Jeremy's emotional turmoil, with eyes locked down at his hands on the table, and Erin's fear of saying something stupid, there doesn't seem to be much that either can afford to say. If it were up to Jeremy, this silence would last all day, but not being able to hold herself back any longer, Erin finally speaks up. "I miss you," she says, and Jeremy just sits there, raising his eyes to meet hers, and staring at her again. "I mean, we never spend time together anymore. It's just that I thought we were more than friends after we, she says as her face begins to turn red, and she turns her face away from his gaze. Jeremy searches for words of comfort, with Erin being the person he would least like to hurt in this world. Feeling his stomach violently turn, he realizes that as he has been suffering, he has been paying forward the pain he has been feeling to this poor innocent girl. Fumbling with his words, he is finally able to sort through the jumbled mess of possible things to say and allows himself to speak. "I'm sorry," Jeremy finally begins to speak. "There's been a lot going on lately, He tilts his head back and stares at the ceiling, wanting to so badly burst forward with tears just beneath the surface. He refuses to release any of his pain in front of Erin. Jeremy will not further burden her with a higher load of his trauma to the weight already heavy on her. "I know," Erin says. "They were my friends too." She stands and walks over to him and puts her arms around him. "I miss them so much, Jeremy," she cries out as she squeezes tight and starts to cry. Jeremy can feel the warm tears trail around from the side to the front of his neck, then continue on down his chest over his heart. "I know you didn't do it," she says in a loud whisper into his shoulder as she grabs and squeezes the fabric of his shirt in her face and falls to her knees. "It's not you hurting everyone," she says, her voice full of pain. She seems to be trying to convince herself as much as show her faith in him. Jeremy confusedly grabs her shoulder and forces her grip loose of his shirt. "What do you mean?" Jeremy asks. "Why would that even be a question?" Jeremy continues, very confused. He hadn't been told by his mother or his lawyer that him being a suspect was released, or seen anything on television about himself and the case being linked at all. Erin briefly pulls herself together enough to answer his question. "People at school have been talking," Erin replies. "It's a small town, and everyone keeps talking about how it's weird that you haven't been in school again after all the death, and..." Tears begin to flow continuously again down her face, and she almost falls to her knees before embracing him firmly around the neck and once again cries into his shoulder. "I know you didn't do anything. I know you wouldn't hurt anyone," she cries out. Jimmy cannot sit there stoically anymore as she sobs deeply into his chest and neck. Gently wrapping his arms around her, trying to shield her from the pain of the world, he presses his lips softly to her moist cheek and neck. Then squeezing her firmly to his chest, he brushes her hair away and places his lips to her ear. "You're probably one of the few people who believes that then," Jeremy whispers as she pulls her head away to look into his eyes. "I wish that everyone believed in me the way you do," Jeremy continues as she glides forward and kisses him in return. Jeremy smiles and begins to stand gently, removing Erin from himself. Reaching behind Erin, he pulls the chair she had previously been seated in closer to his. Erin sits in the chair, which is now directly next to him. "Hell, I don't even think my mother truly believes in me," he shakes his head. "She probably thinks I'm as crazy as my father was," he continues, which pains him very much to say. But it is his true feelings at the moment. He himself cannot even escape from his own thoughts, which now and then shift to that unsavory idea. Erin's eyes open wide, and she crashes her hand, palm down on the table in a huff. "That bitch!" she shouts. "It's not your fault you know everybody who died." She stands and storms around the kitchen. "Hell, so did she!" She continues in frustration, her fists clenched tightly. She paces the kitchen heavy-footed a few times. "Yeah," Jeremy starts confidently. "Everybody knew those guys. Why are they focusing on me?" He stands and leans back up against the countertop. "Just because my father was crazy doesn't mean I am," he says to himself under his breath. Then looking over at Erin, who is slowing her pace for a moment, he motions his hands toward her. "Hell, you knew them too, but everybody knows you wouldn't hurt anyone." "Yeah," Erin begins. However, her mind starts to wander, and she thinks about it for a second. "I knew most of them," she says, stopping her march of frustration altogether. "But I never met the doctor guy." "Doctor guy?" Jeremy asks. "What doctor guy?" The psychiatrist guy," Erin answers back. "You know, the one your dad was seeing when he started going through his issues," she continues. Jeremy starts rolling over everything in his head, and suddenly unwanted fireworks begin shooting off from deep in his mind to the forefront. He runs over to Erin and firmly grabs her by the shoulders. "Is he dead?" he asks her very sternly. "Who?" Erin responds, her face doing less than substantial job of covering her fear. "The doctor. Is he dead?" Jeremy asks again, his voice louder this time. "Did they report him dead?" I don't know, Erin replies. He's been missing so long now, he's probably dead. Jeremy releases Erin and grabs his head. Erin grabs her shoulders, which ache a little, and watches Jeremy as he staggers around the kitchen. His eyes wide, his mind spinning and heart racing. Jeremy has completely lost himself for a moment. No, it can't be, he says to himself as he heads over to the white plastic trash can. Falling to his knees, he frantically starts digging around the trash, continuously saying no to himself as he does so. Jeremy, are you okay? Erin asks, seriously scared now. Slowly taking step after step backward, she distances herself from Jeremy, or whatever he has become in this crazed state. Jeremy doesn't answer. He just keeps digging through the trash until he comes up with a crumpled up piece of paper. His hands shaking, he carefully flattens the paper on the table. Scrambling for a pen without taking his eyes off that piece of paper, he finally grabs a hold of one on the table he had been using earlier. As Jeremy scribbles something only he can see on the wrinkled paper, Erin stands back, eyes fully open and mouth wide as Jeremy stares at the paper and buries his face in his hands. Erin inches closer and closer to him. She takes her time as she reluctantly approaches. Steadily making it to within contact distance, she reaches out, stretching her arm as far as it can go, and touches his shoulder. Upon contact, Jeremy kicks himself out of the chair and onto the floor in a burst of confused rage. Jeremy quickly scoots himself as far back as he can, to the cabinet behind him. He smashes into the cabinet so hard the clean dishes above him rattle together at the impact. Erin, do you have your phone? Jeremy asks, his back against the cabinet and utter fear in his voice. Erin is shaking and too afraid to answer. Erin! Jeremy calls out, darting his gaze up to her. Do you have your phone? He continues, now screaming his question at her in a highly frightened tone. Erin, equally, if not more so afraid at the moment, reaches into her book bag and pulls out her black and pink smartphone. Yeah? She answers. Here it is. She inches over to him and nearly drops it as she hands it to him. Entering the web browser of her phone, he searches the local news channel for information on the murders. After finding a list of dates for the recent crimes, he compares them to the nights he had been tortured by the nightmares the past few weeks. After looking back and remembering the nights of his nightmares, he drops the phone, causing the case to fly off and bounce in multiple directions. He covers his face and cries out loud. What's wrong, Jeremy? Erin rushes over and drops to her knees next to where he sits to comfort him. What's going on? She asks as she grabs his face and points it to hers. Erin's eyes locked on his. He begins to speak. They match. They match. They match. Jeremy repeats over and over again, pointing up at the paper on the table. Erin stands and walks over to the table. She reaches down, grabs the paper, and holds it up. On the paper are two columns, one with the names of all the victims, the other labeled dreams, with short descriptions next to each. What does this all mean, Jeremy? Erin asks, confused. They fit, Jeremy replies, eyes widened, staring directly in front of himself. The dreams, the murders, they all fit. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the story and how it's going, please subscribe so you can get every chapter as it comes through. Discuss in the comments, plot threads, and where you think the story's going. Share with anybody you think might find it interesting. Until then, I'll see you next video.